What's up gamers, Dreamcastguy here, and today I want to talk about the console war that just happened in 2018, because the struggle between Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, it's very cool in general because honestly, we the gamers win. Seeing them compete ends up making it where we get more games, cheaper prices, and all around great deals. But here's the thing, in this year, basically everybody won. No matter what system you own or what you decided to pick up, you are probably having a blast. And honestly, the entire industry wins when that happens. Just looking at the raw numbers, I mean, obviously, we actually had some crazy astronomical figures. Like, literally, just in November, we saw the highest console sales ever recorded in a 30-day period. In just November, the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch each sold 1.3 million consoles each. Not together, each. That is crazy. But today, I actually kind of wanted to get out a giant scorecard and really analyze the major consoles and see who won 2018, because that's kind of just fun for me. Now, I'm not going to be mentioning Soulja Boy's console because it's just so good that it wouldn't be fair. Now, with that being said, let's dive into the Nintendo Switch to start with. Now, to be quite frank, going into 2018, I was a little bit mixed on how they try and handle it. And the reason why is because they absolutely obliterated 2017. Almost every single week we saw major releases, big exclusives, and big bundles that really kept them at the top of the sales charts. But after getting so many huge games like Mario Odyssey, Mario Kart, Splatoon 2, and things of course like Zelda, it's hard to try and follow that up with a much lighter year. But it seems like what Nintendo's strategy was to take a step back the last couple months and sort of just catch their breath and finally let all the third-party companies jump in here and start to release their own projects. Now, to be quite honest, I wasn't sure if this would work. It seemed like a pretty tough gamble, but clearly it paid off. There were so many studios this year who released very interesting ports of their games with exclusive content, but also some third-party studios that ended up releasing exclusives for the Nintendo Switch, like Octopath Traveler. And obviously, that was one of my favorite games of the entire year. It was a retro-inspired RPG that felt like old-school Final Fantasy in all the ways I absolutely love. But moving past that, I feel like they really threw out some really peculiar games. Like, I think some of the Switch ports like Captain Toad Treasure Tracker were cool, and we also saw things like Katamari Damacy. It seemed like Nintendo realized that in order to try and expand their reach, they needed to get more weird, and it clearly paid off. And then, the big thing they did was they decided to end the year with all their major titles. Mostly being Pokemon Let's Go, which ended up literally breaking console records, and also Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, both of these were ones that I wasn't sure were going to move a ton of units. I mean, they're both good games. Obviously, I loved them, but I wasn't sure how much just mainstream appeal they'd have. But looking at their sales figures, obviously everybody picked them up. So I think that the Nintendo Switch, it still did really good this year. Not quite as much as I hoped, just to be really flat out, but it makes me even more excited now for what they're going to be doing in 2019. Now, with them out of the way, let's dig into the Xbox One. For some reason, it seems like everybody loves to beat up on Microsoft's hardware, but I mean, I think it's pretty apparent that this year was the biggest growth year ever for an Xbox console. Now, what I mean by that is the Xbox 360 and the original Xbox had some big sales numbers, they got a lot of fans, but it was always kind of steadily growing. What's interesting is if you look at a chart of the rough sales figures of the Xbox One, it's always going, but in 2018, it's a spike. And I think this comes down to the fact that they decided to try and focus more on their back catalog. Now, I'm just going to really spell this out. There wasn't really any major Xbox One games this entire year. We did get stuff like Sea of Thieves and State of Decay, but those aren't really major exclusives in the vein of Gears of War or Halo. Instead, it seemed like Microsoft realized that one of their main powers is that they have a huge backlog. So what they've decided to do this year is really open up the floodgates of backwards compatibility. The Xbox One is now able to play thousands of games when you include the fact that so many hundreds of Xbox 360 and original Xbox games work on it, along with all the indie stuff. Also, the really interesting experiment that surprisingly is paying off is how much they've thrown themselves into Game Pass. This is one of those little things that I wasn't sure would work. The idea of a monthly fee and just downloading games, it doesn't seem like something that would really get such a huge following, but clearly it does. Now, Games Pass in general, I think, is a huge part of the success of the Xbox One. I mean, I think that part of the reason that people are buying it so much this year is because every game on it is so cheap. I mean, by paying a small monthly fee, you get access to every Xbox One game, basically. Everything Microsoft has ever touched. I mean, I've been going back to all the Fable games just because I can. And that was a very bold move. I also think that Microsoft focusing on Games Pass is what made games like Sea of Thieves get a huge fan following. Sea of Thieves, in my opinion, is quite a boring game, but I think it's really fascinating to see that people are putting hundreds of hours into it because they got it on Games Pass. Now, this was a very smart move, but I'm not sure it's going to keep going forward. I mean, it's just one of those things where Games Pass is cool, but what are you going to do in the long run if all your games are so cheap? I mean, obviously things like Crackdown are going to be on there, Halo Infinite's going to be on there, which makes me think that eventually this is going to cost them more than it makes them, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm curious if a bunch of people are going to be buying the next Xbox just because they want more free games. Now, the final thing I want to focus on is the PlayStation 4, because the PS4 this year had the highest console sales and the highest game sales, making it something that seems like the clear winner. But to me, the thing that really kind of invigorated my interest in Sony this quarter and this year is the fact that I loved their exclusives. I mean, seriously, this is probably one of the most jammed-packed exclusive windows ever. Over the course of the last year, we saw some really giant exclusives like Spider-Man and God of War and all sorts of tiny games, but then we also saw stuff like thousands of indie releases and things like Yakuza, Ni no Kuni 2. I mean, it seemed like wall to wall, every single week we were seeing big exclusives only on the PlayStation 4. But what's really peculiar is the fact that a bunch of companies are now releasing even exclusive or timed exclusive downloadable content on the PlayStation 4. I think it's the fact that now that we're approaching over 100 million PlayStation 4s sold, people are beginning to think of it as the default console. When this starts to happen, it makes it where if you're a smaller studio or a console or a developer and you're trying to cut cost, you start thinking, okay, if I could only make my game for one machine, which should it be? And they end up choosing the PlayStation. Honestly, as a PlayStation owner, I love it. I have spent so many thousands of hours this year just picking up random games. Also, Sony's been having more sales than ever. They've been doing their little flash sales where for 24 hours, they'll make like 100 different games 70% off. And so I end up buying all sorts of stuff for dirt cheap. Titanfall 2, Tacoma, I mean, anything I can. Even if it's a really peculiar looking game that I haven't heard of, if it's $3 and the trailer's cool, I'm probably gonna buy it. Sony really killed it this year, and I feel like they're about to possibly hit a wall. The PlayStation 5 absolutely needs to be backwards compatible. That is not a negotiation. The PlayStation 4 at this point is getting near to be the biggest selling system ever. When it passes that 100 million mark, it is going to be in a whole new league, which means that obviously they have sold hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of games. Now to do that, it's a huge success. But if your next console isn't able to play those, you're going to have a bunch of people sticking with this generation instead of moving on. I'm very curious what happens next, and going into 2019, how everybody's going to handle themselves. Because 2018 was a big success for everybody. No matter what you were playing on, you were probably having a blast. I mean, I know I was. But what comes next? I think we're about to enter that weird period between console generations where they try and phase out this hardware and prepare the next. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in 2019 we see one last giant rush to get every cool game done and released in a 12-month window. Either way, I'm very, very excited. But I want to know what you think. What console did you primarily play on this year, and what was your favorite game this year? I'm actually genuinely curious about that, because for me, there was too much. Honestly, even now, after having done my top 10 games of the year list, I'm still a little bit undecided. There was just so much out there that I loved so much that even now I'm going back and playing new DLC, new expansions, new content on these games that are already out there, and already I love them so much. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh man, I feel like all the comments are just going to be spamming Soulja Boy jokes. You don't have to do that. You can just tell me about how great games are. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.